Hi, this is another solo episode with me, KP, while Chelsea's out on her paradise vacation. And this time, I really wanted to talk about why I find astrology like worth a lifetime study practice, which is what I've dedicated myself to. So, astrology began for me as a way to understand humans by archetypes and just the sun signs when I was a kid. And then the more I got to understand that each planetary placement in each of us gives us another energetic thing to think about and how they relate to each other. And I love astrology for it being a self reflective tool for us to get to know ourselves and to get to know the people that are close to us, get to know Brad Pitt or Matt Damon in their inner workings while we're watching them in a movie, that kind of thing. That is enough of a reason to be interested in astrology. But the more I learned, the more I saw that everyone goes through cycles, and some of us don't have certain cycles, but all of us have certain ages and points that show a lesson or something to really lean into at that point in life. Like we are all very aware of the terrible twos, that concept where a child begins to say no a lot and they become feisty and they start demanding what they want, what they need. That's perfect timing. That is their Mars return, their first Mars return. Mars returns to the same place that they were in the sky every 2-ish years. And just as that, the terrible twos, we understand that there's the midlife crisis, and that is around age 40 to 42 in astrology. Some people might say that it's a little bit later in life, depending on the person. That's when people buy their Porsche or they change their career, they get divorced because they don't recognize themselves anymore. So we're all aware of this, that like 21-year-olds act a certain way, 35-year-olds act a certain way, 85-year-olds have certain experiences. And I think it's interesting to think about that. And I'll talk through some of them as an astrologer, but I think it's interesting to talk about it as kind of like a philosophical understanding that life happens to us in phases, and we can rush the process. We can lean in, we can accept the moment, and we could also feel like we're running behind some people. We can feel like we're ahead of people, like people who have children in their teens versus people who have children in their 40s or 50s. There's this feeling that we're not on time or we're past due time when we're comparing ourselves to other people. And what really attracts me to IFS, internal family systems, in parts work is that when you encounter a part and they're expressing what they need or what they want or just how they're feeling, you're not trying to change them in any way. You're just trying to get to understand the part or the couple of parts that are speaking with each other. You're just trying to listen and accept them. And the more that we accept people in our lives as well, the more that they soften and things become more beautiful, more joyous, because we're not trying to change things before it's time. I'm not someone with an encyclopedic knowledge of things, so I'm not too sure of where the concept of unfoldment comes from. Unfoldment, other than I read about it through Joanna Macy, who definitely was speaking from Buddhist tradition. And the concept of unfoldment, a hard word for me to say, is that all of us are moving together all the time. And we're co-arising, we're co-changing, we're co-unfolding. And we can't stop something in order to have something else. We are all doing this together. And it's impossible to know what caused an effect in actuality. It makes me feel a part of everything. And it makes me feel like I too am important, just as every other being living and breathing on this planet is important to my growth, my beauty, my rest, my everything. So that's why I think it's important to talk about timing in astrology, and I'll get into the practical stuff now. Because it's exciting to think about this stuff. So I talked with the terrible twos. Whoever's listening to this podcast is probably not 2 years old. So I'm not talking about you right now. I'm talking about maybe a child in your life, or maybe you're a teacher and you're around a lot of 2-year-olds. You know when that child enters this part of their life. before this moment, my understanding is they are learning. They're following your cues, they're following your lead, but there's that moment where this being starts to become assertive, start saying no, temper tantrums, all that stuff. That's when it starts to grow larger. And astrologers can point to Mars returning to the place that Mars was that moment the child was born as that significant period in their life where they're practicing how their Mars works. And Mars is the planet we go to learn about how we're motivated or how we get what we need, how we assert ourselves. So that return moment is Mars showing up and allowing that human being to practice Mars energy again. And for the rest of that person's life, every 2 years, we get to practice that exact Mars energy again. Nothing's going to be perfectly exact because other things are moving in the sky at very different rates, but Mars returning to that exact point is giving us our energetic kind of reset or like practice point. That's really interesting to me. And I'm wondering if parents or teachers, people who have 4-year-olds around them, notice another kind of terrible twos repeat where they're practicing Mars energy. I personally don't have a lot of experience with 4-year-olds or 6-year-olds, but I'm curious if anyone wants to share in the comments their experiences. Another interesting thing that happens in our young years is that Jupiter returns to the place where Jupiter is the moment you were born every 12 years. So at your 12th age, around that age, it depends sometimes, but around 12 years old, Jupiter asks us to expand our container. So it's usually around age 12 that we start to understand things more philosophically or more spiritually or more outside of the family, more outside of the domestic life. We start to understand that we're a part of society. Uh, this is a moment where kids stop lying so much or they start lying more. There's a lot of tests of integrity, which is a very Jupiterian thing because society and education and all these things that cohere us as people together rely on trust and justice and honesty, integrity in order to continue to work. So that's something to think about. The next time that shows up is around age 23, 24. And we can make a case for it. That's also when we expand our container and we think more about how we want to be people of integrity in society. That's after high school, definitely after college years, where we have to start applying ourselves as adults in the world. Something to think about. Saturn does returns every 28 years, but there are also moments inside of that 28-year cycle that have challenge points. One way we can put it. Age 7 is the first challenge point. That's when Saturn in the sky is squaring off Saturn in the birth chart. So it's like a right angle kind of is being made. That's age 7 is usually when we start to like develop responsibility for the first time in our life. We have to tie our shoes. We have to keep our cubby clean. We have to have a folder. This is around first grade-ish, right? Seventh or second grade. This is when we are asked to take on more responsibility. This is around the age where we can trust a child to walk the dog around the block kind of thing. And so that's one way to think about Saturn as the planet that teaches us responsibility or boundaries, things that require care and attention in order for things to persist. So that's 7. And then we have the Saturn opposition around 14. And that's when we start to feel challenges, I would say, interpersonally. This is when we begin our teenage years, when we can go off in the world a little bit more without our parents' discretion. And we make decisions that can change our entire lives. You can get pregnant at 14. You can fail all of your classes at 14. You can start doing drugs at 14. Like there are so many things that you can do around that age that will change the rest of your life. So it's a challenge point of knowing how to commit to a long and healthy life and make good decisions that will set you up for success, right? Okay, after that is around age 21. I think that's pretty obvious. Age 21 is pretty, I think, ubiquitously known as the age where you get drunk in public and you realize how stupid and terrible that is. Right? You are driving across the country like that. There's just more independence that requires more responsibility when you're 21. So 28 is when Saturn returns to the same place in the birth chart, 28-ish. And that is when we feel as humans, it's probably one of the most difficult transits because it's like an authentication checkpoint. And if you are not acting in integrity, you're not acting high responsibility, you're not doing what your soul and your heart and your mind want to be doing in this lifetime, you will be pushed with great pressure toward being authentic. I hope that makes sense. So if you're really off track, that's when you feel really, really high tension. And that tension hopefully moves you back onto a path where you can feel good about yourself, where you want to wake up in the morning and keep going forward because you feel like your life has importance in this world. Okay, moving on from Saturn energy, around 1819 is when our nodes return to the same place that they were in the chart. So the nodes are always exactly opposite from each other in the sky. So if the north node is at 1 degree Pisces, the south node is at 1 degree Virgo. Those signs are opposite from each other. And they keep moving around the zodiac opposite from each other always. And it takes about 18 years-ish to make a complete cycle. Around 18 is very similar to what I said about age 21, is that 18 is when fate can really change things. 18 is when some of us join the army. 18 is when some of us get married. It's one of those moments where the choice you make then sets the next decade or so in motion. And then after that, the next nodal return is 36-ish. I think it's 36 and a half. 36 is another moment where a lot of people make big decisions. Like they buy a house, they start a company, they have children, or something like that. It's just one of those like faded portals. This is why, if you're in session with me, I mentioned that the North Node and South Node are very important in the birth chart, but they're not as important as Saturn until you're 36 or 42. So keep that in mind that, like, if you're under the age of 30, just focus on Saturn. That's enough to lean into. What's next? Okay, after age 36, we have this period of time that astrologers call midlife crisis, or some people have called it the Kundalini rising. And that's between age 40 and 43. I think there's a little bit of space on either side. I'm not too exact about that because Uranus and Neptune move at different rates. So certain people have their crisis point or this midlife point at 40. Some people have it at 43. I think I'm having it at 43. A lot of people born in 1989 will have a later midlife crisis. Okay. But this is the Uranus opposition. So that's Uranus is exactly opposite in the sky from where Uranus was when you were born, and the Neptune square. So Neptune moves very slow, where Uranus does a whole rotation, a whole cycle in about 86 years, I think, 80 something years. So around 40, 42, 43 is when Uranus really stretches our capacity for change and disruption and identity and thinking. And it's a transit that can look really chaotic on the outside. But on the inside, if you've done that soul work, you've done that heart work, you've been responsible, you've been good to Saturn, you've been good to Jupiter, the electricity that shoots through your body in this Uranus opposition is not going to look like going on a drug crawl in Las Vegas and buying something with money you don't have. What it looks like is you become alive with this incredible amount of purpose. And some people say it's a spiritual awakening. Some people say it's this soul level understanding that you are a miracle in this world. And there's this thing that happens in that 40-ish year moment where you really want to apply yourself and become a mentor. You want to become excellent at your craft. You really are motivated with that electricity. to apply yourself and your humanity to further humanity. That's the best case scenario. A lot of people become teachers in this moment in whatever way that looks to you. Yoga teacher, school teacher, someone who teaches people in their workforce to do the things that they've done for a few years. I'm really excited for this transit for myself. I get really excited when I see people come to me who are experiencing their Uranus opposition. Another thing that might happen in this Uranus opposition energy is that you become liberated from situations you thought were permanent. You could apply that in so many ways, but I've seen caretakers become liberated from this identity of having to be someone else's sidekick or someone else's caregiver. I've seen people in their position at work like really just get sick of being the henchman, of just doing other people's gopher work. You know what I mean? So it's like it's a really exciting moment. And at the same point, sometimes in the same period of time, Neptune is squaring where Neptune was in your birth chart. This has a slightly different feeling, but it definitely lends to the midlife crisis point. Crisis as the word of like change point, in that Neptune energy is really difficult to track. And it's really beautiful in the way that, like, when we contemplate the cosmos, that feels beautiful. So that can be confuddling. It can be exciting. It can feel like God. It can feel like poetry. It really depends on who you are and how you handle things that don't necessarily have explanation. And so I said earlier that the Uranus opposition sometimes feels like a spiritual awakening or Kundalini rising. This is also the Neptune energy for people who have accepted that they don't have to have language for all that exists or all that they experience, these things that just cannot be explained. That's why their midlife crisis often feels spiritual or awesome in the way that it's just filled with awe. I'm talking about it like it's a super positive experience. It is deeply uncomfortable to be liberated from the structures that you thought were permanent. That's the Uranus energy. And also, it's deeply uncomfortable not to have words to explain what's happening. But I am excited for it because I I can just see I can see that change in people from their 30s to their 40s. And I think a lot of women at least have talked to me about their 40s just feeling so much brighter and open and with more freedom. And I think it's because of the Uranus opposition and the Neptune square. The next big thing that happens is the Chiron return. And I am hesitant to talk about Chiron for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that I have not studied Chiron as much as I've studied the other planets in their cycles. And also, we are so new to Chiron. Chiron, I think, since discovered, just made a full cycle around the zodiac. I believe that's true. It might still be a few months out, but we discovered Chiron when Chiron was last in Taurus, and Chiron just returned to Taurus. So we as humans have been observing Chiron for only one cycle. And of course, we can go back in time and make correlations to, like, oh, maybe this is related, like historical moments related to when Chiron was in Cancer or something like that. But I still think the jury is out, and I want to respect that. So this all said, Chiron makes the first return. If we're so lucky to have a second return of Chiron that's around age 100, the first return is around age 50 or 51. And some astrologers that I respect have talked about Chiron returns feeling like a checkpoint in healing. And this is also a moment where people become healers in their lives. Around age 50 is when you have enough life experience and your heart has expanded enough. You have gone through enough emotional experience to be able to teach other people or guide other people through that as well. This is a really incredible moment for people to become therapists or to become pastors or to become people who help other people. And I would encourage people who are interested in becoming a pastor or a chaplain or a therapist or something like that uh, to, if they're not sure of it now, before age 30 or sorry, age 50, to wait until they're 50 and take that as their last career pivot or one of their last career pivots. It tests your mettle. it really shows you what you've experienced. It's a tender moment. That year-ish of time is a really tender moment. This is also the time in people's lives where they start to feel their bodies age, like really feel their bodies age. And that is a confrontation that is really difficult for some people to accept, to lean into. And I have a few more I wanted to bring up, but maybe I'll just stick to this last one, which is the Uranus square around age 63. So the Uranus opposition is a liberation point. The Uranus square is that kind of moment where if you didn't get liberated, if you still resisted that moment where the shackles were taken off of you and you stayed inside of your, I guess, self-chosen imprisonment, which is maybe too strong of language, but if you stayed, this is the moment where you get to leave. It's another moment where Uranus can push you and be like, okay, you can do this your own way. You can be liberated. And I want that for you if you want it for yourself. So it's around age 63. It's not as intense as the Uranus opposition, but it's pretty intense if you don't feel like you have been zapped with that understanding that you are a miracle and you must apply yourself to humanity. Yeah. Okay. I was going to do the ones that are like the second Saturn return and the another Uranus square or a Uranus return, sorry, around 886. But I really just want to say that in these moments, we can choose to resist them, we can choose to change them, or we can lean in and we can make them as into subjects. So I was thinking about like in middle school, or was it middle school? I think it was fifth grade. So last year of elementary school, I was so excited to be in sixth grade because there was a stock market exchange unit where we learned how to like use the stock market. We like they made us wear ties and stuff like that. And I was so excited to study that and learn about that because it's like such a weird thing that we do as humans. And it just seemed fun. The sixth graders made it seem fun. And I think that I was anticipating that moment so much, getting so excited for that moment so much that I wasn't leaning into the subjects I was learning in fifth grade as much as I could. And I'm not saying that I missed out on something, but that's kind of how I'm seeing some people talk about their Saturn return when they're 25. It's like your Saturn returns like 4 years out. Like when you're 25, it's time to be 25. When you're 12, it's time to be 12. When you're 45, it's time to be 45. And I'm not preaching against like, this need to be young forever thing that Americans are plagued with. What I'm preaching about is not rushing the process and also not staying too long in one moment when you've already experienced it. And I'm curious to hear what Chelsea would think about this as it relates to parts and how certain parts are just not ready to come forward and share what they're thinking and feeling. And some parts are really ready and they just need to be listened to. And so there are things in our psyches, in our journeys, in our desire maps that I think we just have to accept are on a timeline of their own. And it's exciting when you get to live in that moment. I feel like I'm preaching too much, and that's not what I wanted to do, but it's been on my mind as an astrologer, thinking about life cycle stuff, especially as I'm considering becoming a parent and considering how I want to teach that future child how to deal with anger, how to deal with desire, how to deal with curse words, that kind of stuff, which would be Mercury stuff. But and to walk them through what is natural to them and what is helpful for them and encourage them not to rush. And I brought up my dad last time, but my dad's like number one thing he said to me is life's not a race. And I still act like everything is a race. And I just feel very proud of myself because something really switched this year. I'm 36, so maybe it's my nodal return. Yeah, something really switched on for me, and I'm really relishing a moment, and I'm not trying to get 300 things done in a day. I'm not trying to set myself up in every way that I can for my future to be good, but I'm really like enjoying the moment. I'm just really grateful to be alive and in my mid 30s and to have survived and to be able to get to experience the rest of life in those seasons, in those ways, in the ways that I don't get to know ahead of time how they show up. And I hope that for you. I hope that for everyone who's listening that you know what season you're in and how good it can feel, even if it's a hard season, to really lean in. An example I can share is that last year I was in a 12th house year, and that's a whole other concept that I didn't touch on, but it's one of those years that everyone goes through that is filled with loss in whatever way you want to use that word. There's just this element of you don't get to design how things go. Things just happen and you get to be floating along the way. It was really difficult for me as someone who's a designer in every meaning of the word. Anyway, I could have leaned in. I could have read a bunch of novels. I could have rested, but I was working against the current the whole time. And inside of that transit, I also had a really personal transit to my sun, Mars, and my Mercury, where Neptune and Saturn were opposing them. And I knew it was going to be difficult. I didn't know how it would show up, but it really showed up as like extreme fatigue and mobility issues. And it was really, really difficult to be productive in any way. It was one of the most physically difficult years of my life so far. And that is a good example for me because I knew it was coming and I leaned in and I uh, I really leaned into yin yoga. I stopped lifting weights, I stopped running, I stopped doing really hard things on my body that felt good before, and I just stuck to the things that felt really low lift physically. And also, I stopped making plans to drive to visit friends because I knew that I would not have the energy to drive back. And it was difficult to do that. But it felt it felt loving to myself to understand my energy level and not push myself beyond it, which is something that I definitely did in my 20s so much and my 30s. Anyway, I think that's all I wanted to say. And again, thank you for listening to this solo episode. I love, I love recording with Chelsea, and I'm excited to get back to that. And I appreciate you listening. And like I said last time, I am here to make friends. If you have any thoughts you want to share, or you are going through one of those time periods in the life cycle I mentioned, reach out, let me know. Let me know what you're experiencing, what you're noticing, and if it's matching up with what I shared. And if it's not, especially with the Chiron stuff, I would love to hear if you're 50-51, what that Chiron return is feeling like for you. Okay, that's everything. I should say stuff. Chelsea is releasing her Oracle deck sometime this year. I'm going to put in the show notes a link for you to sign up for the like information email for when that's ready to be announced. It is okay. She's not here, so I can be a little gushy. It is honestly, I'm a Oracle deck, tarot deck fiend. It's honestly one of the most profound Oracle decks I've ever used, and I have one of the only copies. Very special, and it's the imagery itself that has really profoundly moved me. But it's also her writing. Her writing just feels brilliant, and it's really helped me make sense of a lot of things. Some of the stuff I've mentioned in this episode. So check that link out. Another thing is I am still meeting with potential book doula clients. I take 3 retainer clients at a time. I am astounded by the people I've met with so far, and I'm hoping they become retainer clients because I would love to work on their projects, but I still have openings. So reach out to me if you have a project, beginning, middle, or end, wherever you are, and you could use that really good support, which is the only support I know how to get a book finished, which is body doubling with someone else and having someone else that is so intimately aware of your project and can bounce off of and give you ideas, but mostly just like be as intimate with your project as you are, so you're not doing it all alone. I often work with people who are experts in their field or who have gone through a series of experiences that make them an expert in some way, I think is a good way to put that. So I've worked with people who have written memoirs, but the memoirs I've helped be written are more educational or like socially minded. They're still memoirs and they're beautiful, but they're interesting in that they have like a message in them. I've worked with people who are therapists, coaches, artists who are writing their practices or their approach to their practice through books. And I write with novelists and poets all the time, but I love working with people who are like bending genres, like poets writing novels or, people who usually write memoir writing poetry, that kind of stuff. So that's my jam. I am not the person you come to write about. I don't know what's a good example. Archaeology. Although I'm very excited about archaeology, I'm just like, it's not my field of study. Though I do teach research and writing in the college sphere. So I can help you with research, but I'm not an archaeologist. I'm more in the like social studies, social thinking, psychology, spirituality kind of realm, and poetry. Okay, that's everything. And I am also an astrologer, of course. So if you want a one-on-one session, I just think I finally made a list of sessions that I'm going to keep forever, probably. If you know me long enough, I've taken some things away, I've added some things, including the artist audit, astro archetypes, couples reading, caregivers reading. So they're all back. Those are back. Yeah. Okay, that's everything. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a good day. Thank you for joining us for Parts and Charts, the IFS and Astrology podcast. If something sparked insight or resonated with you, we'd love to hear from you.
No, really, we're here to make friends. Reach out to us. Leave a comment, subscribe, and if you feel called, share this episode with someone you care about. Or, if you want to work with us one-on-one and go deeper with this work, check the link in the show notes for how to find us.
Until next time, may all of you feel a part of the family.